And then the last area that I'm probably most excited about is there are, I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but there are some rumors that OpenAI is going to release something called Strawberry here in the next few weeks. And what's really interesting about that is they're using some sort of feedback mechanisms within the design of the language model itself that kind of makes it reflect on its answers before they are delivered to the end user. And sort of one of the hallmarks of these techniques is it almost looks like the model is talking to itself before it gives the answer. And so I'm very excited to see how that actually works out at scale.
Yeah.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Hi there, everybody. This is Mark Verbenkoff, and welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. This is going to be episode number 162, and we are once again diving into the world of artificial intelligence. Obviously going to be focusing on generative AI a little bit more in this episode. So I think it's maybe a little bit of a different episode compared to other ones. We touch on a little bit more of the practical side of implementing AI tools, generative AI tools, which I thought was very interesting, rather than just talking a little bit more of the abstract or the esoteric ideas about, how businesses, people, organizations can use artificial intelligence. This is a little bit more about specifically how these businesses are actually using AI, and also touching on like what type of businesses generative AI is actually more useful for, beyond ChatGPT, right? So the podcast has brought up ChatGPT innumerable times and talked about the benefits, the problems with using it, the concerns about some of the larger types of people with a backing or connection to three-letter agencies going on the board of OpenAI, for instance. But this episode talks a little bit more about the businesses that are already using it and the benefits that are getting from using it right away. So I thought it was a very interesting episode, a very interesting discussion. So yeah, as I said, we talk about that, but also before that, we take a step back and we start touching on how businesses should start to think about artificial intelligence, right? Specifically generative AI, before just diving into AI simply because, your competitor's using generative AI. Well, now we have to use it. Well, maybe take a step back and think about why you should be actually using AI and what kind of benefits AI can be bringing to your organization. We also touch on like which industries are not just using AI, but actually getting more benefits than other industries, right? It's generative AI, though useful, I would argue, for the vast majority of industries out there, it certainly brings more value to certain industries than others. We touch on that. And then, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, like what are the actual solutions that businesses are using? And my guest and I go into some of the more practical kind of real life use cases of what's happening with generative AI adoption. We do go down a little bit of a side tangent to talk about the impact on jobs, specifically coding jobs. We discuss for a couple minutes in this interview, which I thought was quite interesting, and whether coding is going to be the future or not, or if AI is going to be taking over the jobs, the coding jobs. So kind of stay tuned in the episode to hear about that. I thought it was an overall interesting episode, but more than just interesting, I thought it was practical and useful. So if you, like me, for instance, you started a business maybe not all that long ago, and you're using ChatGPT, but you want to get more into actually adopting and implementing and using these generative AI tools that are just profoundly impactful for a lot of businesses, I think that this is a very good episode for you to listen to. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guest here, which is Ron Green, and he is the co-founder and chief technology officer of KUNGFU.AI. This is a leading AI management consultancy and engineering firm with over 20 years of experience in artificial intelligence. He has successfully launched and led several tech ventures, including Thrive Technologies, Ziften Technologies, and powered and currently leads AI solutions development at KUNGFU.AI for clients across multiple industries, which we get into in the episode a little bit. Ron holds a master's degree in Evolutionary and Adaptive Systems from the University of Sussex and a bachelor's in computer science from the University of Texas, and is a sought-after speaker, thought leader, and happy to say he's also a podcast host, and I think that comes across in the episode itself. Again, for those of you that have either just started a business or are part of a larger business, Ron does get into some of the statistics about maybe what size of business, how many people, how much revenue a business has for these kind of like beyond ChatGPT solutions to be actually relevant for. So if you're beyond just a little startup phase, beyond 10 to 20 or 30 people, I think that this episode is going to be a little bit more relevant for you, and hopefully you find it just as interesting as I did. I really enjoyed the discussion. So thanks for listening.
Well, hi there, Ron. Thank you very much for coming on to the podcast today to talk about artificial intelligence, which, as you know, as you have a podcast everybody is interested in and wants to get a little bit more of a better understanding of what the heck is actually going on with all this cool new advancements. So thanks for coming on today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. I was thinking we could start off with how you initially got into artificial intelligence. And I know you've been involved in this world for quite a number of years. So is there like kind of some unique event or some kind of cool story that brought you into this this fascinating and crazy and very fast-paced world?
Yeah, actually, it actually is kind of a funny story. So I've been involved in AI going all the way back to the 90s. And I was wrapping up my computer science undergraduate degree at the University of Texas at Austin. And I had one semester to go, and I always tell people I was just kind of toast. I was done. It was just so much work. And I remember thinking going into the last semester, I don't know if I ever want to see another computer again in my life. I was just completely burned out.
Yeah.
And I had, I think, one elective left to take. And I was kind of curious about AI. And so I signed up and took the course. And within, I would say, the first 2 weeks, I knew what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Just instantly fell in love. And the funny part about this is I remember vividly thinking, oh man, I'm too late to AI, I think. I think they've got this all figured out. Because it seemed like in the textbook that everything was just kind of buttoned up, and it was just a matter of, figuring out a few odds and ends, and it was all done. And so I just left that course, knew I wanted to do it, went and got a master's in artificial intelligence, and have loved the field ever since.
That's great. Yeah, well, happily so. It wasn't all figured out, and AGI wasn't, solved within the next month or two.
Not at all.
But I think that, like I still feel like that. It's like, oh, maybe not everything's solved, but, I'm late to the game, and I've been in it, for a couple of years already. But I think the more... and I'm sure this is the same situation with you, like we're kind of in our own little bubbles, right? We're just surrounded by people who are aware of what's going on, tracking what's happening, involved in the industry, either, at a technical level or consulting level or whatever. And then when you have conversations with people outside, most people don't really understand what's going on, or they have a faint image or vision, but it's blurry and it's not super clear. So,
that's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. Yeah. And I would... I was obviously deeply wrong about, AI being figured out in the 90s. It's really not an exaggeration to say we've barely figured it out right now, meaning, for the first 15 years I was working in artificial intelligence, we were just trying to get things to work, right? We weren't worried about security. We weren't worried about bias or ethics. It would kind of intermittently work. And we weren't even sure if we were on the right path. And, here it is in 2024. And I would say we are at the earliest stages of this. We're going to see, sort of that exponential return on investments within AI sort of the same way we saw it within, chip design. If you think about, you build semiconductors to produce chips, and then those chips could be used to build better computers. We're just at the early stage of that. We're going to see here in the next few years, there's some little inkling of it already, in fact, that AIs are increasingly being used to train more powerful AIs. So it's really, really, really early days.
Yeah, and I think when that really starts to take off, like that's where we get the exponential explosion of intelligence, capabilities, and all these things. And I think
I totally agree.
Well, I mean, I'm fascinated and terrified of that at the same time. I'm sure you are too. And I think anybody who deeply ponders this is probably in that same bucket. Yeah, no, it's I mean, it's a fascinating industry. Glad to have you on today for all this. I don't ask this question enough of guests who are deeply entrenched in the AI field. Like, what is for you the most exciting thing that has come out in the recent, we can say a couple months? I have one thing in mind, but it's already a couple months old, so it's already obsolete. But I want to hear from your perspective.
A few things come to mind. I would say I'll give you three, so I don't have to pick. One is there's this new technique called diffusion. It's new. It's a few years old. What's really, really exciting about it is you can use this technique to generate unbelievably realistic music or images or videos. But it's also the same technique that's kind of really created this explosion within robotics. Because as much progress has been made in robotics over the decades, if you picture a robot in your mind, we don't see them moving smoothly like humans, right? They're still very, quote unquote robotic. And the diffusion technique's helping a ton there. Another thing I'm really excited about is I think like computational biology. A lot of people, I think, unless you're really plugged into that scene, may not realize the giant strides that have been made. And so everything from sort of protein fold prediction to protein molecular targeting, we are seeing monumental leaps there. And what's really great about that is you combine that with the fact that we can do, a genome sequencing in an hour now for an entire human. We're going to have customized therapeutics within the next decade. And then the last area that I'm probably most excited about is there are, I'm not sure if you heard about this, but there are some rumors that OpenAI is going to release something called Strawberry here in the next few weeks. And what's really interesting about that is they're using some sort of feedback mechanisms within the design of the language model itself that kind of makes it reflect on its answers before they are delivered to the end user. And sort of one of the hallmarks of these techniques is it almost looks like the model is talking to itself before it gives the answer. And so I'm very excited to see how that actually works out at scale.
Yeah. As somebody who uses ChatGPT Premium daily, I often get the you've kind of, reached your limit, kind of take a break thing. It's again, fascinating and terrifying when we're thinking about the new models that are coming out, the new versions, the tweaks that they're making to make this thing even more powerful. I mean, I had a problem with it just this morning where I asked it, write a couple sentences with a 90 character limit for this platform that only accepts 90 characters. And it gave me things that looked like it, but it was, 91, 92, 100, 89. So like one was in, but the other three were left out. And I think that as these advancements, whether it's Strawberry or Q-Star or whatever these things that'll come out, are going to make these tools so refined that you're going to really be able to rely on it at a I think a much deeper level. Like I have a number of clients that are just starting to use ChatGPT. Like I've been pushing them for months. And they're just kind of starting to use it, and they're like, "Oh wow, like this is phenomenal." And it's like, yeah, like you're doing it for refine my sentence or restructure this paragraph. Like that's great. Like yeah, it's fantastic. But I think that for people that are using, and not just to focus on ChatGPT, but all of these type of chatbots, it's gonna get I would think substantially more utilized and then dependent and then maybe, too dependent or over dependent, and, we kind of...
I actually agree with that last part as well, because, Apple just announced that they're going to be rolling out, quote, Apple Intelligence in, I think, October. And built into that is, email summarization and then sort of rewording or tone modification, where you can take some content you wrote and modify the tone. I think people are going to get used to that really quickly. If people are out there, I'm like you. If people are out there and they're using it less than 10, 20 times a day, like us, I think they're missing an opportunity, because it is fantastically helpful in my day to day.
It's amazing. Yeah, and just one point, like, I've stressed this so many times to people who haven't used it, and like, I think people kind of have a little bit of an idea, but it's only really when they use it, they're like, oh, this is what Mark or these other people are talking about. But there's no real, like, I don't think you can truly grasp it until you've actually utilized it and seen what it's...
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And another example of that is there are sort of coding assistants like Copilot, and what's the new one, Cursor. And I've been building software systems for decades. And if you'd have told me 5 years ago that we would have AI coding assistants that would help, you could describe what code you want and it would generate it for you, I wouldn't have believed it.
Right.
And now, at KUNGFU.AI, my company, we use coding assistants every day, everybody on the engineering team. And it's really an enabler or sort of an augmenter, because it can, worst case scenario, it kind of acts as a very powerful autocomplete, but you can literally describe kind of what you want. And if you're experienced enough, you can look at the results and tell at a glance whether it's in the right direction. And it really, really can streamline any type of software development lifecycle. It's a really major tool.
So I didn't think that we'd go down this path, but it's kind of a personal interest for me, right? This technological unemployment theme when we're talking about AI. And I think coding is something that, as you said, 5 years ago, nobody was thinking about. Wasn't there this meme many years ago, maybe like 7 years ago, like, learn to code, right? Like, if you've lost your job, learn to code, and therefore you're going to have a job kind of forever. So like, I wanted to learn how to code, but I got too busy, and maybe for the best. What's your perspective on coding in the next, say, 5 years or so? If you and your team are using these tools all the time as like an autocomplete tool now, is it going to become like a team member in 2 years, and then it's going to be its own team in 5 years? Like, what's your perspective on this?
That's a great question. That's a really, really good question. It's difficult to say. I mean, I think looking about 5 years out is sort of the right distance, because if you try like 10 years out, nobody.
Just a very small point. I started this podcast about 3-4 years ago, and I always used to ask 10 years, and I've had to drastically cut that back only the last year or so to 5 years, and it might be dialed down to 3 years in the next couple of months. So
I know, right? I mean, it's just absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
So 5 years out, I think what we'll see is, I would probably say half the developers in the world are embracing these AI coding assistant tools, and about half either find they dismiss them out of hand, or they find that the error rate or hallucinations, or however you want to say it, are a little too high, and they don't want to really deal with it. Generally, the more sophisticated you are, the more benefit you get out of them, simply because you're able to spot more easily the mistakes that they make. I think in the next 5 years, we're going to have AI coding assistants that will be able to do large tasks. So right now you can ask them to do things like, write a function or refactor something, or, kind of help you in some small way. The analog would be if you were writing a book, it could maybe help you at most complete a few paragraphs, but it's not writing entire chapters. Within 5 years, we're going to have these AI coding assistants, and you're going to describe at a large level what you're interested in, and it's going to be able to knock out, 90 to 95% of it by itself. So I'm really not sure what will happen after that. But it is there's not a doubt in my mind that we are headed towards that level of power from AI coding assistants.
Yeah. And I guess this has been a bit of a discussion or debate online that I've seen, in Reddit and other forums where people are saying, yeah, this is nonsense. It'll never take over coders, maybe 100%. Right. But if you even get maybe not to your 95%, even 50%, I would assume, as I'm experiencing now, I've got 4 screens here, I got ChatGPT up here, there's a lot of stuff going on, but I'm able to do so much more with these tools now. And I'm assuming it's going to be the same thing with these programmers, these coders, who, you might not need a team of 7 or 10 coders. You might just need 3 exceptional ones that are able to use, or maybe not even exceptional, but ones that are average and using these tools properly. Yep. They know how to use the tools better than they might know how to code, and therefore they're more valuable. This is one of the arguments that I've heard repeated many times. Is that correct?
I think there's a lot of truth to that, because what's going to happen is a lot of just like any profession, there are aspects of software development that are kind of boilerplate, right? That are repetitive, that are, only mildly creative. And I think all of that just disappears, right? All of that's going to be highly automated. And I also like the way you framed it, which is, I don't think software developers are going away anytime soon. But it is going to be augmentative, meaning if you're an engineer and you're not leveraging these tools, you are going to be at a massive disadvantage. And so I think people will get on board eventually. And very much, this is the way we always think about AI at my company, is we're always looking for augmentative AI. We're not looking for opportunities to replace humans. We're looking for ways to take either repetitive, boring tasks off their plate and then simultaneously help them accomplish things either faster or more accurately. And I think looking at AI coding assistants through that lens is exactly the right perspective at this point in time.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you. Not as a coder, but as somebody who deals with other industries and other kind of jobs. That's what I'm seeing as well, right? It's this augmentative force, not necessarily a replacement force, with a big yet, right? Or not now, right?
Right.
And I think, as you alluded to, we're going to see tremendous advancements over the next couple months and certainly years. And then I'll have to have you back on. We'll have to discuss that a little bit deeper.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't want to focus just on coders today, although I think it's fascinating because it impacts so many parts of our society. But so I did have a look at your website before you came on, and personally, I think that there's some really interesting questions to come up, and I'm sure that the audience will like this as well. So you're helping companies adopt artificial intelligence solutions, and I think that one thing that might be interesting for people to hear is a couple of different questions here, but one, what are the solutions that companies are adopting right now? And does it differ in the different kind of industries that you're looking at? I saw healthcare, there were a couple other ones. I've heard of, and I've talked about ChatGPT and these kind of basic chatbots a number of times. But, there's also website chatbots that helps clients and customers get to their answers a little bit faster. So those are some that I'm a little bit more familiar with, but I'm sure that there are many other types, and I'm aware of other ones, but I want to let you respond so I don't ramble the whole time. Maybe we can start off there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're 100% right that most of the world, when they think of AI right now, they think about ChatGPT or Claude, and they're essentially thinking of language models. Yeah. And they may interact with those language models and have the models generate text or images, increasingly sound and video and things like that. But that's kind of really all they think of.
Yeah.
I would say, something crazy like 80% of the work that we do at KUNGFU.AI is a combination of sort of AI strategy and custom engineering. And most of the custom engineering is what I call domain-specific AI. So sticking with the example you mentioned a moment ago, like healthcare, we've developed systems that are capable of accurately predicting breast cancer risk 5 years in the future. And what's really amazing about that is this model. This is a computer vision model. It's looking at mammograms. There is no cancer. This is not a breast cancer detection model. There is no cancer, but it can still, at this crazy high accurate rate, predict breast cancer risk 5 years in the future because it was just trained on terabytes of data. Another really, really common example is we just built a financial trading system for a company, and they're now automating about 60% of their 2.6 billion monthly trades. It's faster, it detects fraud better, it makes fewer mistakes, all that type of stuff. But I would say probably the most common, widely deployed type of AI that's domain specific that you'll see across all companies are things like product recommendation engines, fraud detection, sales prediction, churn prediction, price optimization, all of those types of problems that are pretty common across any business. And if you're a business with a bunch of data, you have your proprietary data set that you've built up over years, maybe decades. That can be a real valuable asset for training custom, domain-specific AI systems.
Very interesting. And I guess, as you said, the different industries have different requirements, different needs, and therefore the different AIs. Maybe a question to follow up there is, so I mean, of course, you're not offering solutions to every single healthcare provider in the world, but do you have a sense of how many, say, like hospitals are looking into this? Like, is it only 5% of hospitals that are reaching out to you and your competitors and your peers out there, or are the vast majority of healthcare providers looking into this sort of stuff? Like, what's your feel, if you will, on this?
Yeah, it's still early days. Yeah. So we're about 7 years old. All we do is AI, and for I'd say maybe the first 5 years, if you were working with us, you were pretty much an early adopter. That's definitely changed now, but it is not even a slight exaggeration to say the vast majority of the companies out there across every vertical have not really taken any serious steps into AI yet. And we'll talk to companies every now and then. They'll come to us and they'll say, "Hey, we need some AI." And we'll say, "Well, what do you need?" And they'll say, I don't know, but I need some AI right now because of the board or because of the executive team, whatever it may be, or maybe there's just fear of your competitors. And I would encourage people, if you're listening to this, a couple of things. One is, don't go build AI just to check a box, right? Make sure that whatever you're doing is aligned with real ROI. And then the second thing I would say is, you don't have to shoot for the moon on the first initiative. There are lots of really relatively, low-hanging fruit opportunities out there for companies to move the needle, get some experience, get some confidence that they can do it, and then build from that. So don't make it a moonshot right out of the gate.
Right. Yeah. You don't need to build a prediction engine for breast cancer on the first try, right? You can, maybe a good question is, what are some of those examples, like tangibly for some of these companies? Because I know that we have audience members who have smaller companies or medium-sized companies, and I've been messaged like, "Hey, like where should I start?" Right? And I kind of say, "Have you used ChatGPT for 3 months?" Right? Like, do you have at least an understanding of how this thing thinks and works? But maybe more enterprise focused. What are some of these other low-hanging fruit options that you're offering?
Some of the I think some of the easiest ones to think about right out of the gate are actually, let me back up one step to kind of set the context. Historically, we as humans have always thought about, like, you think about like chess as being like maybe the pinnacle of intelligence. And if you'd asked people in the 50s, when we have AI systems that can be, chess grandmasters, you do think that'll be indicative of general artificial intelligence? And they would very much have said yes.
Yep.
And it turns out we really underestimated the difficulty of things like speech and vision systems and things like that, because they're so baked into our cognitive abilities, we don't even introspect them. We don't even know really at a deep level how we perform those tasks. And those tasks are really central to a lot of day-to-day operations. So, summarizing documents or extracting information from documents. So if you have PDFs and you have people, reviewing those PDFs and hand extracting information, all of that type of visual perceptive work can be automated now, or it can be automated at a high level, and then you can have humans step in on sort of the edge cases.
Yep.
The same thing goes with other types of data. So if you have, if you're a company and you have, lots of documents, and there are just countless numbers of companies with many, large document sets that they're processing daily, the ability to auto-classify or auto-summarize or auto-prioritize those documents, that is and can be amazingly effective as a first step forward into building AI capabilities within your company. And they are at this stage in 2024 not high risk. The natural language processing and computer vision capabilities that are out there now really make that a viable first step move.
Right. And probably reasonably quickly, right? Like you can get this done. It's not going to take a couple of years to build.
That's right.
Like that.
No, that's absolutely right. We're talking on the order of a quarter or two at most.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, really. This is. I think it was about a year and a half ago now. I tried to help a client with a like they had 1,000-page document. And it wasn't OCR, right? So it was still like images, and some of the text were cell phone pictures that they had then put into this large PDF. And we used one of these online tools, and it was able to get like 30% of it, and the rest of it was just not great. And I think that as you, of course, you're going to build your own kind of AI system within the company, and not just use some online software tool, but I think that a lot of people are using these online, like these free tools, freemium tools, and then they get a sense of like, oh, well, these tools suck. They're only able to do 30% or 10% of what I actually want, and they're not actually useful. And it's only when you kind of look at enterprise solutions that you really realize like, oh, the technology is actually a little bit more advanced, and we can actually do a little bit more, and maybe it's a better idea to actually use an agency. Yeah.
You bring up a really good point there, which is, not only like things are moving crazy fast. So, you had like 30% accuracy, let's say last year, and you probably would have had like 5% accuracy, 5 years ago.
Yes.
One of the nice things is, we're a services company. We are completely technology agnostic. And so, just a little bit of advice for listeners out there. If you're doing something like OCR, don't build that from scratch. If we're ever doing a project and we need OCR, there are open source libraries, Amazon, Microsoft. There are many sort of industrial grade OCR capabilities that you can lean on out there, and they're fractions of a penny per page.
Yeah.
So that's an example of where companies can rely upon tried and true existing technology as a part of that first step, and it doesn't have to be, hey, I've got to go build my own AI from scratch to take that first step.
Right. Yeah, and I guess this is one of the things that companies think incorrectly about, right? It's like, oh, building or implementing AI, we have to do it from scratch. It's going to take forever.
Right.
This is kind of connected to the next question. One of the things that you said was number of companies that come to you, they don't even know what they want. They just want AI. What are some other ways that companies, and I guess individuals in these companies, are incorrectly thinking about AI? Like, I would also assume that they think it can do more than what it's capable of doing now, or less. Like, are there other common patterns or common threads of mistakes that people are thinking about? I think that's a very interesting thing to.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's changed over time. I would say, as I mentioned before, we're about 7 years old. I would say in the early days, it was kind of surprising to me how well-informed people were. I really expected people to come to us and say, hey, could you go build us this time machine or something like that, but for the vast majority of the discussions we had, people were very in tune with what might be plausible. Now, don't get me wrong, they were constantly pushing the state of the art right to the limit of what was possible, but it was almost always possible. There's a little bit more now. I think that there's broader awareness and broader engagement with AI, that some people may underestimate the complexity. They may underestimate the amount of data you need, because pretty much all modern AI right now is a variant of a technique called supervised learning, which means you have to have training data to train the model. And so you can run into situations where somebody may underestimate the amount of sort of effort to get the data in the shape it needs to be to train a model. But again, for the most part, I'm pleasantly surprised at people's reasonable expectations. It is typically just sort of underestimating the data side that we see people come up short a little bit. But what I would say, again, if you're listening to this, don't feel like you have to figure out what AI thing to go build by yourself. There are, companies out there that can help you figure out your strategy. We're happy to do that ourselves, but of course there are other companies as well that can do that. And if you take a sort of a holistic view and you say, here's my business, here's the data I have, this is what the competitive landscape looks like, and then you build an AI roadmap against that, where you're really leaning into ROI and you're building up slowly and you're not doing that moonshot out of the gate, that is by far the best way to go about it and ensure that you are successful. Because there's a crazy stat, like 80% of AI projects don't make it into production historically, for all the reasons that we just covered.
Right. Okay, so following from that, you obviously you mentioned that data's pivotal, absolutely essential for a lot of these projects to go forward and for training the AI. Are there certain industries that might lean more favorably to implementing AI solutions, like ones that have maybe more robust or like already cleaned up data ready to go, like maybe healthcare and financial that you already mentioned, but are there other ones?
Yeah. Actually, I would say there are. And the way I always think about it is like this. Modern AI can deal with unstructured data, meaning you do not have to have your data in a database with, everything perfectly clean and structured. You can deal with things like you mentioned, PDFs or images or, raw text files. That's completely okay. I would say that businesses that are mostly dealing with text or images that have data, this is a little technical,
sure,
that have data distributions that are kind of normal, meaning if you're in healthcare and you're processing clinical records, that is going to skew very strongly towards medical healthcare terminology, and therefore you would have to have a semantic understanding that aligns with that.
Yeah.
If you are dealing with more common types of data, it is much easier to take off-the-shelf AI models and either use them as they are or use them as a basis for training custom models. So I would say, it's actually good news. On average, most companies are probably really well positioned to leverage AI now, and the more sort of esoteric or the more specialized you are, the more you're going to have to think about the data considerations.
Okay, that's an interesting thing to consider. And do you think that that's going to change over the next couple of years? Like, as LLM's capacities get better, it's going to be easier to implement even these technical or highly specialized industries with these AI projects.
Yeah, no, I really do. I think what we'll see is right now, and you nailed it. Actually, it's because the large language models were we're, like in quotes, trained on the internet, right? It's not technically true, but just a vast amount of data collected from the internet. They are broadly knowledgeable about, sort of broad categories of topics, but they're not legal experts. They're not medical experts. As we train those language models that will be specialized in these different domains, it will not be long before they are now used, as we mentioned earlier, as upstream models to train downstream models. And we're seeing that more and more. And so you will have, let's say ChatGPT 6 know as much about the legal space as a professional lawyer, and maybe know as much about the medical space as a doctor. This is not something that's like 10 years away. This is less than 5 years away.
Yeah. Fascinating and terrifying, right? So what does this mean, Ron? Like, I think the old expression was, data's eating the world. To me, it actually more visually sounds like AI is going to be eating our world, for better or for worse. I love talking about the future on this Future Tech and Foresight podcast. What is your sense about what is actually going to happen? And I don't really have a great, clarifying question. Is it jobs? Is it the economy? Is it culture? Like what? Just maybe I'll shut up and let you speak, and then I can follow up with some more specific questions.
I am incredibly bullish, and the reason is that we are going to take all these different domains, which have typically been only partially a part of sort of the information domain. Like, for example, let's take drug development. It is right now within the United States. It typically takes a company about 10 years and $1 billion to get a new drug in the market because of all the experimentation that has to be done in wet labs, because of all of the experimentation and review that you have to go through to make sure that it's not dangerous for people and get it through the FDA. And it's incredibly expensive. And there are now AI models that, computational biology models that can dramatically streamline that entire process. Everything from sort of, amino acid to, conversion to protein folding to protein binding. And what we're going to be able to do are things like simulate hundreds of millions of potential molecular candidates in the computer in an hour.
Yeah.
And that would have taken, not an exaggeration, maybe 200 years to do in a wet lab. And then once we have these candidate drugs, we're going to be able to simulate their efficacy upon patients in a way that doesn't take a decade. So I'm actually one of those people that is really excited. I believe we're going to hit this, we're going to hit, possibly even in our lifetime, this unlimited abundance aspect where the amount of progress will hit that exponential curve, and we will have AIs moving us into the future. Like, let's stick with healthcare, a decade per year, and then 2 decades per year, and it's going to be transformative in just amazingly positive ways. So that's still a little bit out for us, but I genuinely think we're going to see that in our lifetime.
Yeah. I've held these beliefs as well for a long time. I'm hesitant about these things simply because I think there's so many people out there that are fearful about it. And I think that they have also some reasonable ideas. But I've read Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis and all these kind of abundance mindset people, and it's I think it's a great it's a great mindset to go through life because you see a rosier picture rather than a darker one.
Right.
Now I don't want to focus on the darker stuff, but I think we need to bring it up, right? So you mentioned at the beginning something about like cybersecurity and some of these was it AI bias, right? Things that you weren't necessarily focused on in the early 2000s, but now we're clearly seeing some changes, or these things are coming up and impacting society. Most notably with Google's Gemini model, making those pictures of kings that were, of African descent and stuff like that, which exactly makes sense. Maybe again, looking forward into the future, is this going to be kind of solved? Is this kind of intrinsic to these models? Are we going to have our own kind of, filter bubbles or AI bias bubbles where people, I'm in Canada, but we are also a little bit polarized, not as much as in the States, but I can only assume that polarization is going to be increasing with certain people using certain AIs and only getting certain kind of information. So like all these things that I know that you've thought about. What's your perspective going forward?
I'm kind of of two minds, because I think on the one hand it's difficult to really anticipate where things will go. Like where you talked about, especially more than 5 years out. But I could also imagine a world where, as these AIs get more powerful and more capable, you can imagine you hear some piece of news and you can just simply ask your AI to go and vet it. Go look at all the information that it has access to, which could be everything, publicly accessible, and come back and tell me if this is factual. So I can imagine a world where disinformation is gone rampant. I can imagine a world where disinformation actually gets tamped down a little bit more, because we have these systems that are not biased towards one direction or another. And if we can get them to be biased towards truthfulness, then that could actually help. Now, I do have to add that bias is relative, right? Any model is going to have some type of bias or some type of perspective. There will never be a world where we all agree on what is unbiased, right? So it's really a matter of picking what type of bias we want. But I think as long as we're skewing toward a bias towards the truth, the empirical, factual, objective truth, I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah. And I guess maybe the challenge of the century is to make a model biased towards objective truth, right? Because if we're getting, all these different companies that have their own different kind of biases, maybe that is the struggle of the century.
That's a really interesting idea. That's a really great idea, because, having these things skew towards truthfulness is something you could, I've seen great examples where you can go to ChatGPT as an example, and you can say, answer this question incorrectly. And you can say things like, who was who invented, or who was the first president of the United States? And maybe it will say Thomas Jefferson, but it will come up with a plausible wrong answer.
Right.
So you can tell it's right. It understands the idea of truth. It understands the nuances of misinformation in a way. And that's already at this day and age. So I think there's a real chance that we could get to that point in the not too distant future.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. I know that you're steeped in this every single day. I am, but I don't think as much as you are. And, I'm so grateful to have people like you come onto the podcast, because, for me, and I know for the audience, it's just making your wheels spin a little bit more about, the future and what's possible. But also as we talked about, for companies that are interested in this, hey, how do I get some benefit from this, even if I might not exactly know where to start. I think Ron, that's a great way to end the discussion here. I know that you have a bit of a hard cutoff. I will have your Hidden Layers podcast up on the show notes, KUNGFU.AI. Any other, obviously your LinkedIn, are there any other places that you or your company are active and you want people to reach out or follow what you guys are doing?
Yeah. KUNGFU Industries.AI is our website. Reach out to us at anytime. We're happy to discuss. And I just have to say, this was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you having me on, and I really appreciate the deeply thoughtful questions. This was just a ball.
Well, great. I completely agree. And it's always great to have somebody who is not just knowledgeable, but like, as I said, steeped into the industry, right? Like I've had some, whether you want to call them modern day philosophers or whatever, come onto the podcast, and they've got great ideas, but they're not necessarily working with the technology at a technical level every single day. And, even for me, like I criticize myself on that sense. And I think with that, you get a bit of a different sense of what's actually happening. But yeah, I think about this stuff maybe too much, but it comes out during the podcast, and I think it's beneficial for me and for anybody listening. So thanks again for coming on. It was great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.